Hello everyone, and welcome to my Bold and Beautiful Today channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Hope slams agenda down Carter's throat, ignores kiss? Let me begin by clarifying the context. First, the preceding engagement concerned Hope threatens Daphne, a narrative piece. The latest query appears to be a political or dramatic story between Hope and Carter. The term depicts a conflict in which Hope aggressively pushes an agenda on Carter while maybe rejecting a sexual gesture, the kiss. I need to decide out the genre here. The preceding story was literary fiction with emotional depth. The user may be seeking for a similar style, but in a political or power struggle environment. Alternatively, there could be a combination of personal and professional conflict. The phrase slams agenda down Carter's throat is strong, implying an aggressive imposition of ideas. Ignores kiss adds a personal touch, possibly referencing a prior romance or unrequited feelings. The user may want a summary that captures the interplay between professional aspirations and personal background. They may be interested in topics such as power dynamics, betrayal, atonement, or the cost of ambition. Since the preceding response was a narrative paragraph, this summary should be a cohesive story summary rather than bullet points. I need to make sure the names Hope and Carter are consistent. Hope is most likely the protagonist, assertive and determined, whereas Carter could be a rival or someone with opposing interests. The forgotten kiss represents a former intimate encounter that has been overlooked in favor of the agenda. Perhaps Hope is using the agenda to shield herself from personal vulnerabilities. The user may expect a full plot summary, including character development, conflict, and resolution. They undoubtedly want the summary to emphasize the contrast between Hope's drive and Carter's resistance, as well as the emotional implications of their missed kiss. The title is exciting, thus the summary should mirror the drama. I should organize the summary as follows: an introduction to the setting and characters, the inciting incident, the agenda push, the development of their conflict, the function of the neglected kiss, climax, and resolution. Continue to use vivid and interesting language, as in the last response. Make careful to incorporate emotional depth and internal challenges, particularly how their personal background influences their professional connections. I need to see if there is a certain framework or universe to which these characters belong, but as none is offered, I'm assuming a standalone story. Also, ensure that the summary is 1,500 words long, with enough content and subplots to cover it without being overly verbose. Consider including supporting characters, motivations, and the consequences of Hope's actions. Avoid making it overly generic. The prior example had rich metaphors and emotional layers, so this should follow in that tradition. Perhaps investigate Carter's point of view as well, including his reaction to the agenda and the disregarded kiss. Demonstrate how their background complicates the current dispute. Perhaps the agenda includes personal stakes for both individuals. Ensure that the title parts are addressed, specifically the imposed agenda and the ignored kiss. Perhaps the kiss was a sign of weakness or a calculated maneuver, and rejecting it represents a prioritizing of goals over personal feelings. Create suspense about whether the kiss will resurface or influence their dynamics later. Include crucial conflict-related moments such as meetings, confrontations, flashbacks to the kiss, and internal monologues. Conclude with the outcome of their struggle. Does Hope win? Will Carter retaliate? Is there a happy ending or an unhappy one? Check for coherence and flow, making sure each paragraph flows smoothly. Use descriptive words to create atmosphere and express feelings. Make sure the themes of power, ambition, and personal sacrifice are clear. Also, assess whether there is a twist or revelation that adds dimension to the plot. Finally, proofread to ensure that the word count is met while remaining consistent with the user's preferred style. Make sure the summary is complete but not a full chapter-by-chapter dissection. Concentrate on the main plot aspects and character arcs surrounding Hope and Carter's struggle. Due to technical reasons, the search feature is currently unavailable. Hope slams agenda down Carter's throat, ignores kiss? In the cutthroat world of Washington politics, where alliances are forged over whiskey and broken over headlines, Senator Hope Valencia had carved out a reputation as a steel fist in a silk glove, a progressive firebrand with a knack for disarming opponents with wit before dismantling their arguments with surgical precision. But her most recent battle, a sweeping climate reform bill known as the Green Horizon Act, had stalled in committee, held hostage by procedural maneuvering and the quiet sabotage of her longtime rival, Congressman Carter Blythe, a silver-tongued conservative from Texas whose oil money ties and folksy charm made him the left's most vehement opponent. Their rivalry was legendary, a decade-long dance of public sparring and private détentes, but it took a sharp turn 6 months ago during a late-night session at the Capitol, when exhaustion and a shared bottle of bourbon led to a moment of reckless vulnerability, a charged and lingering kiss in the dim light of his office, a collision of frustration and something neither dared name. The next morning, they had jointly resolved to bury it, a lapse in judgment that would never be spoken again. Until now. Hope didn't have time for nostalgia. The Green Horizon Act was her legacy bill, a last-ditch effort to secure her position before retiring, and Carter's committee held the key to its survival. But with the midterms approaching and fossil fuel lobbyists whispering in his ear, Carter had become evasive, evading her calls, canceling meetings, and dismissing her plans as coastal elitism. Hope, on the other hand, was not one to back down. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, she marched abruptly into his office, her shoes clicking like gunfire across the marble floor and clutching a folder of damning emissions data. Carter's helper attempted to block her, but she shoved past, bursting open his door to find him leaned back in his leather chair, boots put on his desk, and beaming like a man who had already won. "Hope," he said, without bothering to stand. "Are you here to yell at me, or beg?" The subsequent events were more akin to a siege than negotiations. Hope threw the folder on his desk, her voice razor-sharp as she mentioned methane leaks in his region, cancer clusters near refineries, and the ticking clock of catastrophic climatic disaster. Carter's smirk dissolved into a hard, guarded glare. "You think I don't know?" he snapped, standing to confront her. "Do you think my constituents want to breathe poison? But your measure is a guillotine, Hope. You're asking me to destroy jobs and entire towns, I'm asking you to save them," she shot back, pointing to a flood projection map. "Or do you only worry about boats when they benefit you?" The air cracked, not with the heat of ancient attraction, but with the rage of two individuals who understood just where to point their blades. Carter came to a sudden stop. "Do you ever wonder why we are always here?" he muttered, his gaze falling to her lips. "Are you often arguing with each other?" Hope froze. The memory of that kiss hovered between them like a ghost that neither had exorcised. For a heartbeat, the room appeared to tilt. But Hope adjusted her blazer and wore a mask. "Don't," she warned with an icy tone. "You don't get to weaponize that." Carter flinched, and she took advantage, leaning in until their breaths mixed. "This is not about us. It's up to you to choose between the future and the past." Carter skipped the committee vote the next day, a strategic move that stifled the bill's progress. Hope's team advised her to publish the emissions data and destroy his career, but she hesitated, not out of mercy, but for strategic reasons. That night, she cornered him at a donor banquet, her crimson gown standing out among the black suits. "You're a coward," she screamed beneath the clink of champagne flutes. Carter's jaws constricted. "And you are a hypocrite. You talk of sacrifice, but are you willing to risk everything? Even your valuable legacy?" The question lingered between brutal and intimate. Before she could respond, he disappeared into the crowd. Days passed in a stalemate. Hope's allies defected, and her approval ratings dropped. Then, a break, an activist group published images showing Carter dining with oil executives, their laughter captured in mid-frame. The media pounced. "An ethics probe," shouted the headline. "Blythe's betrayal." Hope's teammates celebrated, but she stared at the fuzzy images, her stomach twisting. This was not her play, yet it worked. Carter, cornered, gave up and offered a stripped-down version of her plan, a phony concession. "Take the win," her chief of staff insisted. But Hope, the optimist, refused. The final confrontation broke out after midnight in a deserted Capitol hallway. Carter, rumpled and red-eyed, obstructed her path. "Would you rather burn everything down than bend?" he growled. "Do you think purity is more important than progress?" Hope came forward, her voice shaking with wrath. "Do you believe that half measures are effective? Do you want redemption?" Carter's facade slipped for a heartbeat, revealing deep pain in his eyes. Then he gave a harsh, hollow laugh. "Are you still trying to save me, Valencia?" He turned to depart, but not before mumbling, "Some of us do not deserve to be saved." The bill died. Hope announced her resignation, leaving a legacy laced with what-ifs. Carter, meanwhile, narrowly won re-election, but his smile never reached his eyes. They never spoke about the kiss. But in her final address, Hope paraphrased Mandela, "It always seems impossible until it's done." As cameras flashed, her gaze flickered to Carter, who stood stiffly in the back of the room. He did not clap. Months later, there was a surprise. Carter proposed his own climate measure, which was bolder than Hope's and bears her fingerprints. Pundits described it as a smack to his base. Hope, watching from her Cape Cod porch, gave herself a faint, weary smile. The kiss remained wordless. It seems like the agenda would survive both of them. Hope threatens Daphne, Hope threatens Daphne. I need to figure out what this title implies. It sounds like a narrative, or even a thematic analysis. The names Hope and Daphne could represent characters in a story. Perhaps it's a story in which one character, Hope, threatens another, Daphne. But I need to make that a 1,500-word paragraph. Let me consider possible angles. Is this a fiction story? If so, which genre? Maybe drama, suspense, or a psychological thriller? Alternatively, may it be an examination of a concept in which hope is embodied as a threat to a character named Daphne? That's an intriguing angle. Personifying abstract abstractions is a popular literary device. So maybe hope represents the concept of hope, and Daphne feels threatened by it. Wait, in Greek mythology, Daphne is a nymph who transforms into a laurel tree to avoid Apollo. Could this be a modernized retelling? Perhaps Hope, like Apollo, is hunting Daphne. But instead of a god, there's hope. That could be symbolic. Perhaps Daphne is attempting to avoid hope because it is causing her anxiety. But why is hope threatening? Usually, hope is regarded as positive. Perhaps in this scenario, hope is dangerous since it leads to disappointment or risk-taking. For example, clinging to false hope may impede someone from going forward or accepting reality. Alternatively, Daphne could be in a circumstance where hope poses a threat. For example, in a dystopian world, yearning for a better future could be harmful because the authorities suppress such views. Perhaps Daphne is in a violent relationship and wishing for change keeps her imprisoned. The hazard stems from a cycle of hope and disappointment. I need to create a narrative around these concepts. Let's sketch out a probable story. Daphne is a woman who has been through considerable trauma or loss. She has established a life of routine and safety, avoiding risks. Then hope, either as a person or a force, appears in her life, inspiring her to hope again, to take risks, to love again, to dream. But this hope is dangerous because it disrupts her secure but stagnant existence. The plot may focus on her internal tension between the comfort of her current situation and the anxiety of wanting more, which could lead to pain. Alternatively, hope could be someone who appears to be positive but has a secret objective. Perhaps hope is manipulative, using her veneer of cheerfulness to manipulate or injure Daphne. The threat is subtle, disguised as assistance, but ultimately putting Daphne in danger. Another perspective, Daphne is a member of a community where hope is outlawed. Perhaps in a post-apocalyptic world, resources are few, and hope inspires revolt. Daphne begins to hope for a better life, which alarms the repressive leaders. Hope poses both an internal and external hazard. I have to decide on the setting and characters. Let's go for a psychological drama. Daphne is a recluse artist who has lost her family in an accident. She has withdrawn from society and is living in isolation. Hope, a new neighbor, continuously seeks to befriend her and encourages her to reconnect with the world. Daphne is hesitant to open up because she is afraid of experiencing further pain. Hope's tenacity threatens Daphne's fragile mental state. The story would explore Daphne's internal conflict, fear of loss, and if embracing hope is worth the risk. Now expand this into a 1,500-word paragraph. Wait, one paragraph? That is odd. Normally, paragraphs are a few sentences on a page, but 1,500 words is more like a chapter. Perhaps the user intended a 1,500-word essay or tale. But the query reads paragraph, thus it may be a long, thorough paragraph. However, in ordinary writing, such a lengthy paragraph would be difficult to read. Perhaps the user is not a native English speaker or is confused about terminology. Alternatively, they can prefer a continuous text with no section breaks. Assuming it's a continuing story, I'll continue. Begin by setting the scene. Introduce Daphne's situation, her seclusion, and her previous trauma. Then introduce Hope, your neighbor. Describe their interactions, including Daphne's resistance and Hope's persistence. Increase tension as Daphne feels intimidated by Hope's entry into her life. Investigate Daphne's internal conflict, flashbacks to her loss, and the risks of hoping again. The story climaxes with a confrontation in which Daphne must choose whether to accept or reject hope. Resolution could be ambiguous or reveal her choice. I need to make sure the themes are clear: the duality of optimism as both comforting and perilous, the psychological effects of trauma, and the conflict between safety and vulnerability. Use descriptive words to communicate emotions and locations. Consider using symbolic aspects, such as Daphne's art representing her inner state or the weather reflecting her emotional struggle. Check the coherence and flow. Because it is a single paragraph, make easy transitions between concepts while keeping a narrative thread. Avoid abrupt transitions. Balance exposition, dialogue, and internal monologue. Consider using free indirect conversation to delve into Daphne's thoughts. Potential obstacles include keeping the reader involved during a long paragraph, avoiding monotony, and guaranteeing clarity. Use different language forms, vivid imagery, and emotional depth. Maintain the threat aspect by demonstrating how Hope's acts or presence especially harm Daphne's equilibrium. Possible narrative aspects include Hope organizing a community event and inviting Daphne, who unwillingly attends. Daphne begins to open up, but she panics and lashes out. Hope confronts her, sparking a heated fight in which Daphne accuses Hope of failing to understand her grief. Optimism discusses her own personal challenges, demonstrating how optimism helped her endure. Daphne is conflicted, but she begins to see another side. However, the threat persists since accepting optimism requires confronting her fears. Ending, Daphne takes a little step toward hope, such as joining a therapy group or doing art again, but the conclusion is uncertain. The threat is reduced but not removed, which leaves opportunity for interpretation. Now, organize this into a coherent story. Begin with Daphne's regular routine, her secluded existence. Introduce Hope's arrival and their initial encounters. Increase the tension, climax, and resolution. Introduce backstory through memories or triggers. Use descriptive details to improve the atmosphere. Due to technical reasons, the search feature is currently unavailable. Hope endangers Daphne. Daphne's world had long been confined to the four walls of her weathered cottage, a sanctuary perched on the edge of a cliff where the roar of the ocean below drowned out the cacophony of memories she dared not confront, memories of a life once vibrant, now reduced to the hollow echo of laughter that had vanished 5 years ago when a stormy night claimed her husband and young daughter, leaving her stranded in a void where even grief had grown stale. Calcified into a numb each morning, she awoke at dawn, brewed bitter black coffee, and painted the same desolate seascape on a canvas that never dried, her brushstrokes as heavy and unyielding as the guilt that bound her to this purgatory, a self-imposed exile from a world that felt too sharp, too bright, and too alive to bear. The inhabitants in the surrounding town murmured about the widow on the cliff, an ethereal figure seen only during her monthly journey to the market, her eyes downcast, her voice a ghost of itself, as if speaking too loudly would summon the past she'd buried beneath layers of seclusion. But then hope arrived, not the abstract concept, but a lady with sun-kissed curls and unwavering optimism, who moved into the long-vacant cottage next door with a truck full of mismatched furniture and a laugh that slashed through the coastal fog like a knife. Hope, who arrived at Daphne's doorstep on her first day with a basket of lemons and a smile that didn't waver even when Daphne slammed the door in her face. Hope, who left handwritten notes tucked into the crevices of Daphne's mailbox, invitations to neighborly tea and sunset walks. Hope, whose very presence felt like an assault on the fragile equilibrium Daphne had fought so hard to maintain. Daphne initially dismissed her as a nuisance, a passing distraction, another well-meaning visitor who would eventually tire of her frigid hesitation. However, Hope refused to give up. She stayed on the outskirts of Daphne's life like a persistent shadow, her optimism a slow-dripping poison that seeped through the gaps in Daphne's armor. "You can't hide forever," Hope said one afternoon as Daphne ran past her garden, head bowed, clutching a loaf of bread like a lifeline. The words hung in the salty air, sharp and accusatory, and Daphne paused, her breath seizing in her throat as if the sentence itself carried physical weight. That night, she dreamed of her daughter's hands, little and sticky with melted ice cream, and awoke to the sound of her own scream, the cottage's walls pressing in like tombstones. The next morning, Hope came back, this time with a pot of scarlet geraniums and a story of her divorce, bankruptcy, and cross-country voyage to find herself in this lonely corner of the globe. "I used to think hope was a lie," she murmured, her voice quieter now, her gaze steady as Daphne stood in the doorway, divided between slamming the door and, what? Listening? But it isn't about ignoring the suffering. Daphne's fingers tightened on the doorframe, her knuckles white. Making room. As if her heart wasn't already a crowded tomb. However, something in Hope's tone, a raw, unadulterated honesty, pierced her, and she found herself stepping aside against her will, allowing Hope to lay the geraniums on her windowsill, their petals flaming like warnings. Days turned into weeks, and Hope's presence became a constant force, weakening Daphne's barriers one conversation at a time. She learned about Hope's failing art gallery in the city, her effort to rebuild after losing everything, and her determination not to let bitterness harden her heart. "You're still breathing," Hope remarked once, her gaze fixed on Daphne's as they stood at the cliff's edge, the wind whipping their hair into tangles. "That means you still get to decide what happens next." Daphne looked away, tears burning her eyes, for the fact was that optimism terrified her. To Hope meant unfurling her tight fists, letting go of her sadness, admitting that the past could not be changed, and what if, in daring to want something new, she betrayed the ghost she'd clung to so desperately? What if hope did not lead to atonement, but to a different type of loss that she couldn't bear? The threat became apparent on a rainy evening when Hope persuaded her to attend a community art display in the hamlet, a modest gathering of local painters and poets. Daphne hadn't been in a crowd since the funeral, and when she walked into the dimly lighted hall, the murmur of people, the clink of wine glasses, and the aliveness of it all hit her like a physical blow. Her chest clenched and the walls appeared to pulse inside. A guy pushed past her, his fragrance strong and strange, and she was back in the hospital corridor, the fluorescent lights humming and the doctor's mouth moving silently as he delivered the news. Panic sprang in her throat, and she fled, falling into the alley behind the gallery, gasping for air. Hope discovered her there, crushed against a brick wall, with her clothing soaking through. "Is this what you want?" Daphne spat, her voice rough. "To force me into a world that destroyed me? To pretend I can just move on?" Hope kneeled beside her, unwavering. "I want you to see that you're not broken," she told me. "You are just stuck. And it's acceptable to be stuck, but it's not okay to give up trying." Daphne shivered, the words cutting through her like shrapnel. Later, she reflected on how Hope's hand hovered near hers, waiting without touching or expecting anything. By winter, the geraniums had wilted, their crimson petals brown and brittle, but Hope's determination had not wavered. She dragged Daphne into a project, a mural for the village square, something that would leave a mark, she pushed. Daphne protested, but her hands, famished for purpose, betrayed her by drawing outlines of waves and seabirds on the cold brick. They worked in silence at first, with only the scratch of brushes against stone, until words began to pour out, fragments of memories, anxieties, and regrets. One freezing afternoon, while Daphne painted a charcoal gray, heavy storm cloud, Hope remarked gently, "They'd want you to survive, you know. Not just exist." Daphne's brush slid, leaving a black track across the sky. She didn't say anything for the rest of the day, but that night, she dreamt of her daughter again, not as the ghost she'd mourned, but as a kid racing through a golden field, turning to call, "Keep up, Mama." When she awoke, her pillow was soaked, yet her chest felt strangely light, as if a stone had been moved. Daphne learned that the danger of hope lay not in the prospect of new agony, but in the dreadful freedom it provided, the ability to let go of the strangling grip on the past, to step into the unknown with no assurance of safety. It was a subtle unraveling, a silent rebellion against the story she'd etched into her bones. On the day the artwork was presented, a crowd gathered, their breaths visible in the cold air. Daphne stood away, her heart hammering as she watched people trail their fingers over the swirling blues and golds, the storm clearing for an unexpected morning. Hope stood alongside her, silent for once, their shoulders almost touching. Daphne did not smile, weep, or collapse. But she stayed. And that, perhaps, was the first frail thread of hope, not a promise, but a possibility, trembling and alive, threatening to rewrite her story one brushstroke at a time.